framework that governs revenue mobilization as well as utilization. So for this one, I'll take it in two forms. I'll first begin at looking at the legal framework that governs revenue mobilization. And I must mention that the councils actually have various sources of income in which they generate the revenue. They are categorized as council-owned. Then we also have, they also have revenue that comes into the government as well as loans and other streams of measurement. So the government actually funds the local authority through the local government utilization fund, and this is actually came about as a replacement of the salary grants which was there. And the whole reason why the grant was actually replaced was because of the flaws that it had with regards to its legal framework. So with the local government utilization fund, it's actually the main source of income that most local authorities use. And this equalization fund was established under Article 163 of the Constitution of the Lords of Zambia as amended by Article 2 of 2016. So the fund was optionalized in 2015 following the enactment of the Local Government's Amended Act of 2014, which was repealed and replaced by the Local Government Act of number 2 of 2019. So it's with the repealed and replaced act that we see the guidance as, on how revenues are supposed to be mobilized. So with regards to traditional revenue sources, the local government actually raise sources through local taxes. They also raise sources through levies as well as fees and charges. And the councils actually have powers to enforce the fees as well as charges as outlined in the Local Government Act. So what we say is that the legal framework that actually governs resource mobilization in Zambia is actually adequate, and the whole reason why some of these local authorities are failing to enhance the resource mobilization is not because of the inadequacy of the legal framework, but rather because they have low resource base, and this is actually led to them being unable to meet the obligations. And I had alluded to earlier to say that the local government equalization fund is actually the main source of revenue for these local authorities. So with the low resource base, we actually find that councils are actually finding it very difficult to mobilize their own resources. Now, with regards to the utilization, the Local Government Act number 12 of 2014 states that 80% of the fund must be utilized by councils for payments of salaries and provision of services in communities, whereas 20% of the allocation needs to go to capital projects. But what we're seeing is that councils are actually utilizing the entire local government equalization fund to maintain salaries as well as operations for the councils. Moving on to the second question, which reads as follows. Are the procedures governing expenditure of revenue in local authorities sufficient? Are there any gaps, and what is suggested? So the first form of law is that of the Financial Regulation Statutory Instrument number 125, and this statutory instrument actually provides control as well as management of council funds. Then we also have the Service Regulation Statutory Instrument number 115, which provides regulation of local government. And lastly, there's the Council Standing Order, which is a code of conduct that regulates council staff's behavior as well as council's conduct. So these are some of the legislation that we have that actually govern the expenditure of public resources within local government. But there are also some measures that have been outlined with regards to the Local Government Act that actually stipulates the proper procedures in which councils must adhere to with regards to expenditure. And which of the first one actually is that of the financial of the local authority should be a period of 12 months, ending as at 31st December in each year. So this is a universal way in which councils need to actually provide financial statements on the utilization as well as expenditure, which can be used by Auditor Generals to the Auditor General's office to actually audit and also see how effective the funds were being utilized within the local authority. Then also in line with the National Budgeting Act, National Planning and Budgeting Act of 2018, which we do know to say that it's yet to be enacted, but within this act there's actually a clause that stipulates that local authorities need to prepare annual budgets, annual budgets which also guide in terms of expenditure of revenue in those institutions. Then, subject to the Constitution as well as the Public Finance Management Act of 2018, the Minister of Finance may, in consultation with the local authority, make regulation with regards to administration, the management of funds, also the activities that those funds need to be used for, as well as financial matters that might be pertaining to the management of funds. Then local authorities are also obliged, or they're also expected to keep proper books with regards to accounts, and these books are subject to audits. They're supposed to be provided, although we did note in the previous Auditor General's office to see that there were other councils that did not provide financial statements, which actually goes against the procedures of public expenditure. Then, subject to the Public Finance Management Act of 2018, a local authority may, with approval of the Minister of Finance, invest funds for local authority that it does not immediately require. So these are funds that come in as a result of a surplus, and it's pending approval from the minister that they can actually invest those funds in other streams. Without that approval, local authorities do not have the power to actually expend funds in other forms. Then lastly, there's some procedures that actually allude to the utilization of the funds, which I had explained earlier to say that 80% must be used for for salaries, whilst 20% is used for capital investment. Then now for gaps, as PMRC, we noted some gaps with regards to the procedures that have been outlined. And the first one is that of the weak financial base that the local authorities actually have. And this has actually caused problems because now the councils are using the entire equalization fund to go to salaries as well as operations as regard, and not giving out the 20% that is supposed to be intended for capital projects. Then we also noted that there's usually a delay in disbursement of the equalization fund, which also hinders the operations of local authorities, and also reduces the powers to use the expenditure correctly. Then the Local Government Act has various restrictions as it has been outlined that most of the major decisions are done pending approval from the minister. So this actually restricts local authorities. And even given the fact that we're actually trying to decentralize, the fact that there's still a huge amount of power that's given to the minister actually goes against the whole essence of decentralization. Then the last gap that we noted at PMRC is that of the lack of guidance with regards to the interpretation of the capital expenditure, so as to use the other 20% that is intended for the intended capital expenditure to purchase, for example, luxurious personal order vehicles. Now, suggesting the way forward, as PMRC, we came up with several recommendations on what needs to be done in order to ensure the effective expenditure of public resources within the council. And the first one is that we as PMRC actually call for councils to have a comprehensive domestic resource mobilization strategy, which they should adhere to, so as to lessen their dependency on the local government equalization fund. Then we also call that there's need for principles of corporate governance to be embedded in the running of local authorities. And with this regard, we also call that there's need for refresher courses that should be provided to principal officers, and this will also ensure the effective as well as efficient utilization of public expenditure. Then as PMRC, we call that there's need for timely disbursement of funds by the Treasury to the Ministry of Local Government, which will also ensure the effective implementation of the decentralization policy, as well as provide timely resources for community development projects. And lastly, in order to facilitate decentralization, we also call that there's need for more powers to actually be dissolved from the Minister of Finance to local government, so such as seeking approval on certain investments, and this will also help vast more power in local authorities. Now, moving on to the third area of focus, which is the strategies that need to be employed as a way of enhancing resource mobilization in local authorities. As PMRC, we came up with various strategies, and some of these strategies, as a way of coming up with the strategies, we also looked at lessons from best practices with regards to what other local authorities are doing in different countries. So for the first one, as PMRC, we feel as though local authorities can enhance resource mobilization by the creation of council car parks in designated places, what we're currently facing, and mostly in the central business bodies, the inadequate parking space, and this is linked largely to demographic factors as well as the increase in people that are actually having car parks. So the councils can actually climb on this opportunity and provide car parks in line, maybe underground car parks, which they can do with through public-private partnerships. And we also call that these car parks must have an electronic platform similar to those of that are found in airports, and which also reduce on corruption, and it also intensify the council's resource base. Secondly, as a way of enhancing the resource mobilization, we feel local authorities can actually draw lessons from Namibia, which has implemented public transport systems that are run by the councils. So on this one, the Namibian government actually has various buses that use different routes, and the timely buses which can be used to generate resource mobilization. Other than that, we can use public system transportation to actually be hired out to other maybe churches or organizations or individuals, similar to how car hires actually operate the services. Then the third strategy that we have as PMRC is that there's need for enhanced waste management collection services by the municipality. And this, we came up with this strategy as a lesson that we drew from South Africa, in which the local authorities have actually intensified the revenue mobilization through enhancing waste management. And one of the facts that we've actually noted as PMRC is that waste management is actually a profitable business, because you can actually use some of the recycled garbage for recycling, and also the degradable garbage can actually be used for compost, which can be sold, and the councils can actually generate more income with regards to those streams of measure. Then we also call for the implementation of electronic revenue collection system, and what we've noted is that electronic revenue collection system actually helps curb corruption, it intensifies revenue collection, and also reduces the strain that individuals would have to paying or queuing up in order to pay for council levies as well as fines. And as PMRC, we also like to encourage the local authorities to tap into the fact that Zambia has got a large mobile subscription, and there's also the coming up of mobile money. And we just call that local authorities can use this platform to actually charge revenues and collect fees through the use of mobile money. Then the last strategy that we have is setting up revenue collection targets. So when you set up a target, it's actually easy for you to monitor your progress and also try to see ways in which to intensify your efforts if those targets are not met. So for local authorities, they can actually set up annual targets of revenue that they intend to achieve, and they can actually use that as a goal on their operations. Now, coming down to the challenges that hamper effective collection of revenue in local authorities, as PMRC, we highlighted various challenges that affect revenue collection. The first one is that of increased control as well as political interference by individuals, and this is something that we've noted with regards to the bus stations as well as markets where we have political interference, where instead of the councils collecting fees from marketeers or maybe from bus personnel, those fees are not actually collected due to the political interference. The second challenge that we have is inadequate knowledge on legal provisions governing revenue collection. Dad mentioned at the beginning of the presentation to say that there's an adequate framework that governs revenue collection, but the information is actually, there's need for intense sensitization, as many people do not have this information, and they also do not see the legal implications that is there with regards to not adhering to the needs of paying fees as well as other revenue forms in which councils collect their revenue. The third challenge that we had is unregulated trading areas. So for unregulated trading areas, this has come about mostly due to the high rates of street vending, in which council personnel has actually reduced the ability to collect fees and charges from marketeers and other traders. And so going forward, we would like to see more trading places that are regulated. And lastly, there's insufficient services provision by the councils. So for insufficient service provision, people do not actually see the need to pay charges and fees when the service that is being rendered is not up to standards. And most of the challenges that the councils are actually facing with regards to provision of services is due to the fact that they do not have resources that they can use to actually employ or maybe enhance the service delivery in this sector. So now, having looked at the gaps as well as challenges, as PMRC, we've called for various recommendations that we feel, if adopted, can actually enhance revenue mobilization as well as utilization of funds within local authorities. The first one is that PMRC urges local authorities to implement automated pay systems to enhance revenue collection as well as accountability. So councils can do this by linking mobile money services to ease payments of levies as well as service charges. And our second recommendation is that we suggest that local authorities learn from other institutions such as the Zambia Revenue Authority on best practices as well as strategies on how to enhance revenue collection. We would also like to urge local councils to enhance service provision, which is likely to improve revenue collection and compliance by the general public. Would like to suggest that local councils visit other municipalities that are performing well and have implemented good revenue collection systems to draw lessons and strategies to enhance revenue mobilization. And lastly, we at PMRC of the view that conducting continuous sensitization to the general public on the importance of paying council levies as well as service charges in a timely manner will improve compliance as well as revenue collection. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
First and foremost, is this with all the councils in the country? Because we've got local councils, municipality, and the city council. Are they all grouped together on the law base, resource base? And secondly, you said there is political interference with the bus station and markets. On this one, if the political interference was reduced, would this make the councils much better and they improve their revenue base to an extent that they can spend on their own?
Stating that the council makes huge sums of money. Of course, they do make money, but also there are constraints in the city. Given the numbers, I'm sure you're aware that the council is not servicing the entire city. So that is pointing, I think, to resource constraints on the part of the council. And the council has, in particular Lusaka City Council, has publicly stated that they have insufficient resources to service the city. I think there's more work that needs to be done in trying to see exactly how Lusaka City Council is expending its finances so that we can provide a better service for the people. That requires a very thorough assessment. So I think that's our position regarding Lusaka City Council.
Too long ago that they made a collection which was able to pay off salaries from just the bus stop. And in addition, how many areas?
4 months.
They've cleared for 4 months just from the bus stop. So I just wanted you to have that in the back of your mind as a follow-up question is coming. We have had the council here themselves. They have agreed that they have got a broader resource base and they're capable. Except that they have not just put things in order themselves. They even gave us a date that by a certain period they would want to break off. They'll break themselves off so that they stand alone. I don't know, how do you reconcile with your statement?
You answered to say that when councils are not able to provide services that they are mandated to, it negatively impacts their revenue collection. And you went further to say the public does not see the importance of paying various levies and taxes when service delivery is poor. And we come to your recommendation, number 5. You are saying we are of the view that conducting continuous sensitization to the general public on the importance of paying council levies and service charges in a timely manner to improve compliance and revenue collection. Now, don't you think it's important to sensitize councils as well on the importance of good service delivery? Thank you.
What Honorable Mchima was asking about Mobilisation revenue collection, something is not adding up because, like my colleague has alluded to, that the council appeared before us and we were going over the equalization fund. And when we got the statistics from them on the correction of revenue as a local authority, they agreed that at some point they feel they will not need the equalization fund. They will do away with the equalization fund because they will be able to stand on their own, and that is not only salaries, on every piece on every piece of maybe service delivery within the city. So your research is saying they are unable because they don't have the resources, but then they say they have got the resources. Where are we?
With your presentation, I've not seen where you're making a comparison on the establishment, whether the councils that are in the rural areas are able to run with a certain number of staff that is equivalent to the ones that are in the rural, and sorry, with the ones that are in the urban. Because when we start looking at emoluments also, that has become an adverse effect on those that are being posted into these rural settings.
I'm looking at general services that the council is supposed to provide. And I've told you that the city council is failing to provide services for the city. We're talking about water and other services that they charge citizens for. So they're not providing those services at the moment. And then I've pointed to doing a thorough assessment to cost the exercise of providing these services benchmarked against the resources that they have. That's the only time that we can have a conclusive response regarding their resource base versus full provision of the services to the entire city.